The silence that followed was deafening. My sister Victoria's fork clattered against her plate as she stared at my phone screen, her mouth hanging open. The number glowed back at us. $127,438,921.47. That's not real, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fireplace in Mom and Dad's dining room. I calmly took my phone back and slipped it into my pocket. You're right, Victoria. I probably should skip Christmas gifts this year. Wouldn't want to seem too flashy. Mom looked between us, confused. What's going on? Victoria, why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Dad continued cutting his turkey, completely oblivious to the tension. Victoria's probably just stressed about her promotion at the bank. You know how demanding finance can be. If only he knew. Victoria's eyes were still locked on me, searching my face for any sign that this was some elaborate joke. But I'd been keeping this secret for too long, and frankly, I was tired of their condescending comments about my simple lifestyle. For the past 3 years, every family gathering had been the same routine. Victoria would arrive in her BMW, designer handbag swinging from her arm, ready to regale everyone with stories about her latest client acquisition or her 6-figure bonus. Meanwhile, I'd show up in my modest Honda Civic wearing clothes from Target, and listen to the subtle and not-so-subtle comments about how I needed to get serious about my career. Sweetie, you're 32, Mom had said just last month. Don't you think it's time to move out of that little apartment and get a real job? Victoria was making 6 figures by your age. What they didn't know was that while Victoria was climbing the corporate ladder at her regional bank, I'd been quietly building an empire from my little apartment. 3 years ago, I'd started with $50,000 I'd saved from my job at the tech startup. Most people would have blown it on a new car or a fancy vacation. Instead, I'd spent months researching emerging markets, studying financial patterns, and making calculated investments that most traditional financial advisors would have called too risky. The first big win came from cryptocurrency, back when Victoria was still calling it fake internet money. I'd invested $20,000 in 3 different coins that everyone said would fail. 6 months later, that $20,000 had turned into $400,000. But instead of celebrating or telling anyone, I'd reinvested it all. Then came the tech stocks. While Victoria was busy selling conservative investment packages to retirees, I was buying shares in companies that were developing artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and biotechnology. Companies that most people had never heard of, but that I knew would revolutionize entire industries. The renewable energy investment alone had returned 3,400% over 2 years. When everyone else was still debating whether solar power was viable, I'd already bought significant stakes in 5 companies that were about to change everything. My biotechnology investments had performed even better, especially after the pandemic accelerated medical research by decades. But the real game changer had been real estate. Not traditional real estate. That was too obvious, too regulated, too slow. Instead, I'd invested in commercial properties in emerging tech hubs, small cities that were about to become major players in the new economy. Properties that I'd bought for $200,000 were now worth $2 million. The warehouse I'd purchased in Austin for $500,000 was now leased to a major streaming company for $80,000 a month. Jessica, Dad said, finally looking up from his plate, you've been awfully quiet tonight. How's work? I almost laughed. Work, to them, meant my part-time consulting job, the one I'd kept mainly to have something to tell them when they asked. What they didn't know was that consulting meant managing my investment portfolio and running 3 different companies that I'd either founded or acquired majority stakes in. It's good, Dad. Actually, it's been really good this year. Victoria was still staring at me, her face pale. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to process what she'd just seen. Finally, she found her voice. That number, on your phone, what was that? Mom and Dad stopped eating and looked at us both. The Christmas tree lights twinkled behind them, casting colorful shadows across their confused faces. What number? Mom asked. Victoria's hand was shaking slightly as she reached for her wine glass. She showed me. Jessica, tell them what you just showed me. I took a slow bite of mashed potatoes, savoring the moment. For 3 years, I'd listened to Victoria's subtle put-downs and Mom's worried comments about my future. I'd watched Dad's disappointed expression every time someone asked what his youngest daughter was doing with her life. I'd endured countless conversations about how I needed to follow Victoria's example and get serious about building wealth. I showed her my investment portfolio, I said casually. Dad chuckled. Investment portfolio? Honey, you don't need to pretend. We know money's tight for you. There's no shame in that. Not everyone can be like Victoria. The irony was delicious. Victoria, who made $150,000 a year and thought she was wealthy. Victoria, who had maybe $30,000 in her 401k and a BMW payment that consumed a quarter of her salary. Victoria, who lived in a rented condo and spent most of her income on clothes and restaurants to maintain her successful image. How much? Victoria whispered. How much was in that portfolio? I pulled out my phone again, opened the app and set it on the table where everyone could see it. The number hadn't changed. $127,438,921.47. Mom dropped her fork. Dad's mouth fell open. Victoria looked like she might faint. That's... Dad started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. $127 million, I said helpfully. Give or take a few $100,000, depending on market fluctuations. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice barely a whisper. How? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. How do you explain to your family that while they were worried about you, you were quietly becoming one of the wealthiest people in the city? How do you tell them that their concern for your financial future was actually holding you back, making you doubt yourself, making you think small when you should have been thinking bigger? Investments, I said simply. Started 3 years ago with some savings. Reinvested everything. Compound interest is powerful when you know what you're doing. Victoria found her voice again, though it sounded strained. But you drive a Honda. You live in that tiny apartment. You shop at Target. I do, I agreed. Because I don't need a BMW to prove I'm successful. I don't need a big house to feel important. I don't need designer clothes to validate my worth. The words hung in the air like an accusation, which in a way they were. Dad was still staring at the phone screen. This is real. This isn't some app that shows fake numbers. I swiped to show him my recent transactions. Sales of stock positions worth millions. Dividends from my real estate investments. Interest payments that exceeded Victoria's annual salary. It's real, Dad. Mom reached across the table and touched my hand. Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? That was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Why had I kept it secret? Why had I endured their worried comments and subtle criticism when I could have easily proven them wrong? The answer was complicated. Part of it was that I'd wanted to see how big I could build it before telling anyone. Part of it was that I'd enjoyed the challenge of living modestly while building wealth. But if I was being honest, the biggest part was that I'd been hurt by their assumptions about me and I'd wanted to prove a point. Because you all assumed I was failing, I said quietly. Every family dinner, every phone call, every conversation was about how worried you were about my future. How I needed to be more like Victoria. How I needed to get serious about money. Victoria flinched at that and I immediately felt bad. This wasn't really her fault. She'd worked hard for her success and she deserved credit for that. But the constant comparisons had stung. I wanted to show you that there are different ways to be successful, I continued. Victoria chose the traditional path. Corporate job, visible success, status symbols. I chose a different path. Neither way is wrong, but you all assumed that because my path was different it was inferior. Dad was slowly shaking his head, still trying to process what he was seeing. $127 million. My little girl is worth $127 million. Actually, I said, pulling up another app, that's just the investment portfolio. This is my total net worth. I showed them the comprehensive financial app that tracked everything, investments, real estate, business equity, cash, everything. The number was even more staggering, $186,542,338. Mom actually gasped out loud. The real estate alone is worth about $40 million, I explained. I own commercial properties in 6 different cities. The 3 companies I have stakes in are valued at another $20 million combined. And then there's the investment portfolio you just saw. Victoria was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. This whole time we've been treating you like the family failure? I finished gently. Yeah. The hurt in her voice was genuine. And I realized that this revelation was probably more shocking to her than to Mom and Dad. She'd built her entire identity around being the successful daughter, the one who had it all figured out. learning that her younger sister had quietly accumulated more wealth than she'd ever dreamed of having must have been devastating. Dad finally found his voice again. What do you do? I mean, where did all this come from? I spent the next hour explaining everything. The cryptocurrency investments that had seemed so risky but had paid off spectacularly. The tech stocks that most financial advisors were afraid to recommend. The real estate deals in markets that everyone else was ignoring. The 3 companies I'd either founded or acquired, a financial technology startup, a renewable energy consulting firm, and a small biotechnology company that was developing revolutionary treatments for rare diseases. The biotech company alone, I explained, is about to announce trial results for a treatment that could help millions of people. If the trials are successful, which early indicators suggest they will be, that $20 million investment could be worth $200 million within the next year. Mom was crying now, though I wasn't sure if they were tears of pride or tears of regret for all the times they'd worried unnecessarily about my future. I'm so sorry, she whispered. All those times we made you feel like you weren't doing enough. It's okay, Mom, I said, and I meant it. The anger I'd been carrying for 3 years was melting away, replaced by something warmer, more forgiving. You were worried about me because you love me. I understand that now. Victoria finally spoke up, her voice small. I feel terrible. All those comments about Christmas gifts, about getting serious about your career. God, Jessica, I'm such an ass. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're not an ass, Victoria. You're a good sister who was looking out for me the only way you knew how. Your path worked for you and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. My path was just different. Dad was still staring at my phone, occasionally scrolling through the numbers as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. So when you said you couldn't afford Christmas gifts, I laughed. I was being sarcastic. I actually bought everyone's gifts 3 months ago. They're being delivered tomorrow. What did you get us? Mom asked, wiping away tears. Well, Victoria mentioned that she's been wanting to take a European vacation but couldn't afford to take that much time off work. So I bought her a month-long trip to Italy, Spain, and France. All expenses paid, first-class flights, 5-star hotels. And I may have also paid her boss to give her the time off. Turns out his daughter needed help with college tuition. Victoria's eyes went wide. Jessica, you didn't. I did. You work too hard and you never take real vacations. You deserve to see the world without worrying about money. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, I know you've been talking about downsizing the house and moving to one of those retirement communities. I looked into the one you mentioned, Sunset Gardens. I bought you the premium villa with the golf course view. It's fully paid for and the HOA fees are covered for the next 20 years. Mom started crying again, but this time I was sure they were happy tears. But that's not all, I continued. Dad, you've always talked about wanting to write a book about your experiences in the Navy. I hired a professional writing coach and got you a publishing deal with a company that specializes in military memoirs. They're excited to work with you. Dad's eyes were getting misty too now. Sweetheart, this is too much. It's not too much, Dad. It's not even close to too much. You know what I spent on Christmas gifts this year? Less than 0.5% of what I made last month. Money is just a tool, and if I can't use it to make the people I love happy, then what's the point of having it? We sat there for a while, the dinner getting cold as we talked about everything that had happened over the past 3 years. Victoria asked detailed questions about my investment strategy, genuinely curious about how I'd built such wealth so quickly. Mom and Dad shared their worries and fears, apologizing for all the times they'd made me feel inadequate. There's something else, I said as we were clearing the dishes. Victoria, your bank, First National Credit, right? She nodded, looking confused. I've been looking at their financial statements. They're in trouble. Bad loans, poor management decisions, regulatory issues. I'd estimate they have maybe 6 months before they either get bought out or go under. The color drained from Victoria's face. What? No, that's not. Mr. Henderson would have told us if there were serious problems. I pulled out my phone and showed her the analysis I'd commissioned from a top-tier financial consulting firm. Mr. Henderson probably doesn't know how bad it is yet. Or if he does know, he's not telling anyone because he's hoping to find a way out. Victoria sank into a chair, the reality of her situation hitting her. I'll lose everything. My job, my savings, my 401k if it's tied up in company stock. You won't lose everything, I said gently. Because I have a proposition for you. She looked up at me hopefully. I'm starting a new investment firm. It'll focus on sustainable investments, renewable energy, clean technology, social impact companies. I need someone with traditional banking experience to help bridge the gap between old-school finance and new economy investing. The job pays $400,000 a year, plus performance bonuses that could easily double that. And I'll need someone I can trust completely. Victoria stared at me. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. 20% equity in the firm with the option to buy more as we grow. You'd be the president of client relations, working with high net worth individuals and institutions. It's exactly the kind of work you're good at, but with companies and investments that are actually making the world better. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Why? She finally asked. After everything I've said, all the ways I've dismissed you. Because you're my sister, I said simply. Because you're talented and hardworking and you deserve better than watching your career go down with a sinking bank. And because I could use someone who keeps me grounded, someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being stupid. Victoria started crying then, really crying. I've been such an idiot. Such a condescending, arrogant idiot. I hugged her tightly. You've been a big sister looking out for her little sister the only way she knew how. That's not idiotic. It's loving. As we finished cleaning up, Mom asked the question I'd been expecting all evening. So what happens now? Do you quit your consulting job? Move to a bigger place? Buy a fancy car? I thought about it for a moment. You know what? I think I'll keep the Honda. It runs great, it's paid for, and it reminds me not to get too caught up in status symbols. I might get a slightly bigger apartment, something with an office where Victoria and I can work on the new firm. But mostly I want to keep doing what I've been doing, finding great investments, building wealth, and now helping other people do the same. And the consulting job? Dad asked. That was always just a cover story. My real job is managing investments and running companies. Now that you all know, I don't need to pretend anymore. As we said our goodbyes that night, the dynamic felt completely different. There were no worried looks, no subtle suggestions about my career path, no comparisons to Victoria's success. Instead, there was pride, excitement, and a genuine curiosity about what I'd accomplished. Victoria lingered as everyone else headed to their cars. Jessica, I meant what I said earlier. I feel terrible about all those comments. Don't, I said firmly. We're sisters. We're supposed to challenge each other, push each other to be better. You did that for me even if it didn't feel good at the time. Your criticism made me more determined to succeed. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. So we're really going to be business partners? If you want to be. But Victoria, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. I'm not offering you this opportunity because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because you're genuinely talented, because I trust you, and because I think we could build something amazing together. When do we start? I grinned. How about the day after New Year's? That gives you time to give proper notice at the bank, and gives us both time to enjoy the holidays without thinking about work. As I drove home that night in my modest Honda Civic, I reflected on how much had changed in just one evening. For 3 years, I'd been carrying the weight of my secret, enduring comments and assumptions that hurt more than I'd admitted. Now finally my family knew the truth. Not just the financial truth but the deeper truth. That success comes in many forms, that appearances can be deceiving, and that the quiet person in the corner might just be the most powerful person in the room. The next morning, Christmas Eve, the gifts I'd ordered began arriving at my family's houses. Victoria called me, sobbing with joy, when she opened the package containing her European vacation itinerary. Mom called an hour later, barely able to speak through her tears as she described the photos of their new retirement home. But the best call came from Dad. Jessica, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I started writing today. The first chapter of my book. I wanted to thank you not just for the writing coach and the publishing deal, but for showing me that it's never too late to chase your dreams. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the money, all $186 million of it, had never really been about the money at all. It had been about proving to myself that I could succeed on my own terms, about building something meaningful, about having the freedom to help the people I loved pursue their dreams. And now, for the first time in 3 years, I could finally enjoy Christmas without pretending to be someone I wasn't. My family knew the truth. Victoria was going to be my business partner, and the future felt bright with possibilities. Sometimes the best Christmas gift you can give your family is showing them who you really are. Even if it comes with a few shocking revelations along the way.